We got calls and messages from my uncle and my father and my grandmother being like, don't leave the house, it's dangerous, people are getting shot. These protests are happening and they're getting bigger and bigger every day.
So our fear every single day when we hear someone's getting shot, it's either your cousin, it's your sister, it's your mother.
Australia has a role to actually, look after us. We are Sudanese and we are Australian.
This is a country at a very crucial moment in its history.
Sydney is Australia's most multicultural city, often renowned for its cultural inclusion. And yet one ethnic community in Sydney feels that their recent experiences have been silenced.
So my name is Elise.
So my name is Fatima Youssef.
My name is Ali Elgalad.
Oh, my name is Imam.
My name is Jiddu Mahdi Ishaq.
My name is Rowaida.
Harun is my name.
I am a science and art student. I major in film studies and immunology.
And I study medical science at Western Sydney Nuremberg campus.
I'm currently studying commerce and law.
And I'm a data scientist.
I'm a solar trader, fiber optic technician.
I am a registered nurse. I work in orthopedic trauma.
At the moment, I'm working full-time at Channel 9.
I'm half Sudanese, half Egyptian.
I was born in Sudan.
So I moved to Australia when I was 2, back in 2000. And every 2 years since then, I'd go back, I'd visit home because all my extended family is there in Egypt and in Sudan. So my aunties and my cousins and my uncles, my grandma.
I still have family living in Sudan, in Khartoum.
When we got accepted into Australia in 2005.
I'm from Western Sudan, which is Darfur region. All my family still live there.
Originally, I'm from Sudan.
So I grew up in Khartoum, that's where I was born, but my family originated from the Nuba Mountain.
Most of my family is in Darfur right now.
There are over 17,000 people born in Sudan currently living in Australia.
We've got a big Sudanese community here. It's based off at the heart of Liverpool. It started back in 2005 and now it's spreading around in Blacktown areas in Lakemba.
Sudan is a country in northeast Africa, home to over 40 million people. In order to understand Sudan's modern political situation, we have to look to the past.
It was a country, and its borders and the way that it was brought together were really a result of British needs. So that construction of a country out of a myriad of different groups that had independent or interdependent relationships rather than collective ones was a real colonial legacy that still plagues the country.
More recently, Sudan has been under the power of military dictator Omar al-Bashir. Bashir took power in a military coup in 1989 and ruled for 3 decades. His reign was characterised by a strong military presence, human rights violations, and corrupt capitalism.
Well, it was brutal. He was indicted by the Human Rights Authority, UN Human Rights, for crimes against humanity. So, here's a leader who used violence as a technique of rule. So that's one aspect of his rule. The other was to allow those members of the ruling elite to accumulate a lot of power and wealth within the country. So you've got this real crony capitalism, because 30 years of that sort of process means that wealth is really accumulated very tightly in a very small group of people, which means that the majority of the population suffer.
There were many protests against Bashir's rule during his reign.
So they came out in the streets in 2011 and sought the reform of the totalitarian system that had been imposed by Omar al-Bashir's government in 1989. There were protests again in 2013 and then again in 2016. And so there was a building of this sort of public opposition to Omar al-Bashir.
I actually had a cousin being killed by the Sudanese government because they were protesting outside of the, in the streets. And that was in 2012. And so much killing happened, people actually were too scared to protest again.
These protests never came to fruition until this year.
In 2018, as a result of a number of economic jolts, an increase in bread prices, some removal of subsidies on petroleum and a few other things, there was an increase in discontent.
When we had arrived in Sudan last year, we had noticed really long lines for getting petrol or getting bread or any kind of like food or just like the necessities of life. We noticed that these lines were getting so long, they were closing off streets. A lot of people couldn't go to work because it took up to 6 to 8 hours to wait in line just to get bread. 24 hours later, the protest had started, streets were getting filled with people, they had had enough.
My sense was that this was a mass protest across the demographics, so it was students, professionals, unemployed, rural sort of farmers and others. So I would say well in the millions of people.
On April 6, a large sit-in protest begins outside the military headquarters in Khartoum. Over the next 5 days, security forces kill approximately 22 people in attempts to clear the sit-in. On April 11, President Omar al-Bashir is overthrown after 3 decades in power.
The popular protest that was the catalyst to his overthrow, but the real overthrow came when the people who were around him decided no longer to support him. That the only way to get rid of the popular protests and to save themselves was to get rid of him. And that's what they did. Now the events that followed that, and this I think is where it's important to remember the history of the Sudanese popular protests and overthrow of governments. Because in the past when this has happened, the overthrow of the government basically led to a reformation of the ruling elite and an embeddedness of the same system. This time, the popular protests and the leaders of the protests were adamant that they wouldn't allow this to happen. So they stayed in the streets again and again.
The protests reached a critical point on June 3, when more than 100 people were killed at a sit-in protest in Khartoum.
Everyone in this room, almost any Sudanese person that you will ever speak to, during the protest, while it was happening, had a relative, a friend, someone dear to them who was out in the street and pretty much vulnerable to something happening to them.
You feel so helpless and hopeless, like we're so far away from it all. And you're not watching soldiers die, you're watching kids like your age who, I'll be at university, I'm at class, and these kids are supposed to be doing the same, but they're dying.
Shortly after June 3, the military imposed a communications blackout, shutting down all forms of mobile internet in hopes of dispersing the protests.
When the internet blackout happened, our only source of news was blacked out.
My parents couldn't sleep knowing that they couldn't contact people that they loved and that lived there.
How dare they close the internet? How dare they hide that part from us? And this is our home, this is our family, what's happening to them?
During this time, Sudanese Australians became frustrated that their concerns and experiences were not reflected in mainstream Australian media.
Seems like whenever there's something negative that's African related, we won't hear the end of it for the next 2 weeks. But when this situation is happening back home, nothing was shown.
It's not on the news. You're not going to know about it?
Frustrated with this lack of media coverage, young Sudanese Australians turned to social media to raise awareness.
When Sudanese people started covering it with their own social media, I think we felt more independent and more strong, and it gave us a feeling that we're doing it on our own and we're succeeding. So it felt good somehow.
Yeah, I guess in hindsight, it sort of pushed us more to get the news out and to get the information out.
The social media campaign grew after the death of a protester was publicised.
His name was Matar. He passed away over there in Sudan due to the protest. He was shot. And there was a video that he posted out before he passed away saying that our martyrs should not die in vain.
But he was a university student, a very intelligent person who blue was his favourite colour. He had painted his walls in his house to be blue. So that's where the colour came from, the colour inspiration, and why everyone changed their profile pictures to that. But then it became bigger than that. It became bigger than just one person. It became a representation of, people could even say that blue was the colour of the Nile, and that's where dead bodies were being thrown and were being hidden. Blue represented the gathering of people, and changing their profile picture to that colour meant that they had put some effort into possibly researching the topic or understanding what was happening. So yeah, I think it was a very important, one of the biggest parts of the spreading of information in the protests and everything like that.
The protest did not just occur in Sudan. Hundreds of people in Sydney crowded the streets to raise awareness about the situation in Sudan and demand government action.
I'm the organizer of a couple protests. We started to get different posters and everything just to stand together and just preach and chant and chant and chant and not stop until our last breath. I was just taking it all in. The fact that all these people are here for one purpose, for our families, for our country, to help out. Hundreds of people came out, which was very impressive.
And in the Nile River was where their bodies was found. Candace led the revolution, yes, it is true. The power of the citizens grew and grew. They continued to push through. They represented the revolution and the colour blue. For they knew the efforts would not go to waste. There would be a history never erased. And so when the government falls, we would cheer out to the sound of the soda. And victory at last. Tells good best, tells good best.
At the beginning of August, Sudan's ruling military council and main opposition coalition agreed on a declaration which aims to lead to a transitional government.
This is one of those protests where I think the military were only willing to go so far. Now the question will be in the next phase, if the military give up everything that they're willing to give up and the protesters are still unhappy, will they turn on the protesters in force? A large proportion of the people of Sudan are looking for a new country with a very different set of structures and systems, and I don't know what will happen in the Sudan, whether it will blossom into something different, whether it'll fall apart, or whether you'll get a new authoritarian ruling elite that will clamp down on the country. It is really hard to know at this point in time.
Despite the pain of the past year for Sudanese communities, the recent political strife has also brought the community together in new ways.
It has always been an urge for us as Sudanese youth in particular to want to come together, but our community, especially from the elders coming down, is very much separated based on tribalism and politics, and that's been a major cause of us not coming together and doing something collectively. Moreover, with the protests that happened, it sort of really built up our sense of patriotism and nationalism and gave us something that we all had in common and really cared about to come together on. And from there, it just became obvious how much we can achieve together.
We've created a different community. It's called SSY, which is the Sydney Sudanese Youth. So SSY, I'm part of the executive committee of SSY. So we've started that group, we've registered that community, and we decided to help out all the Sudanese youth in the country and create events, create memberships.
Our hope within Australia is for our situation to be known and for us to be, I guess, shown for the positive things that are happening.